This is Democracy,
a podcast about the people of the United States.
A podcast about citizenship.
About engaging with politics and the world around you.
A podcast about educating yourself on today's important issues.
And how to have a voice in what happens next. Welcome to our new episode of This is Democracy. This week, we're going to talk about one of those rare events. As historians, we don't like to think anything is very rare. We think it repeats, but this is a rare event, the impeachment of the Attorney General in Texas. This is only the third time that an impeachment like this has occurred. It's the first time an attorney general in Texas has been impeached. The two prior impeachments were of a governor in the early 20th century and then a judge in the 1970s. So this is a very rare occurrence. And we're going to talk today about why this happened in the second largest state in the union, what it means about our democratic process throughout our country today. Texas is often an area that receives a lot of attention because of its prominence within the Republican Party. And this was an impeachment of a Republican Attorney General, Ken Paxton, by a Republican House in Texas. So why did this occur? What does it tell us about our democracy? And what does it tell us about the future of law and order in our society, in Texas, in the United States, and around the world in many ways? We're fortunate to be joined today by a good friend, prominent public official, and really a leader in legal circles and in political circles in Texas, someone who knows more about Texas politics than anyone I've ever met. This is Joe Jaworski. He is a third-generation Texas trial attorney. That means he knows where all the bodies are buried. He's also a former mayor of Galveston, Texas, where he really led the city to great acclaim. He served as a law clerk to the U.S. Court of Appeals in the Fifth Circuit, and he's now spent 30-plus years in private practice as a trial attorney, a mediator, a legal commentator. He's someone who I know people all around the state and the country turn to understand Texas law and politics and turn to get things done in Texas law and politics. Joe, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, Jeremy, gracious introduction. Thank you so much, and hello to Zachary.
Hello.
Zachary is sitting here, of course, ready with his poem as always. What's the title of your poem this week, Zachary?
Musings on the Great Liars and One Smited Attorney General.
I'm really excited to hear this one. I'm gonna put my seatbelt on as you read this one. Go ahead.
The Reverend sends his hatred out to the vast stampede, his pipe dreams fast becoming what the Lord's decreed. Words so warped in this telling, their holiness does fade, the same old lyings oft in prophets masquerade. The speaker sings the songs, salutes the checkered flag, his wild fears elicit their pride from a rag. Truth twisted in the sentences, the masses sway and curve, the service of another oft becomes a reason not to serve. The lawgiver flashes his smile to the crowd. The laws he tells are truthless, pompous, loud. Eyes crooked in this grimace, his face does seem to bend. The bells of justice having rung must surely ring again. So grin away, ye unyielding bundle of falsity, your triple chins of rolling viscosity. For though we haven't seen each lie turned upside down, at last we've thrown one lofty liar to the ground.
Wow, Zachary, you're really kicking a dead horse there, aren't you?
Perhaps.
I'll tell you, Jeremy, that's so good it's going to get banned soon.
Exactly. Though I'm not sure. There might be some Republicans who want to promote that poem. What do you think, Joe?
That's right.
Zachary, what's your poem about?
Well, my poem is about the long line of demagogues in Texas politics, of which Ken Paxton is only one, but also about how important it is, even in a climate in which truth is often obscured, for one person, one example, where the truth is defended and where political courage really does win. At least temporarily, and even if this impeachment doesn't succeed when it goes to trial in the Texas State Senate later this year, at the very least, this will show that lies and illegal behavior do have consequences in this state.
Joe, what happened this weekend? I have to confess, as a historian and a political junkie like you and someone who follows things, I was still a little stunned how quickly we went to the impeachment of someone we had long known was, as Zachary said, a liar, a demagogue, an incompetent attorney general. Why did this happen now?
It is remarkable. I have to just reflect on the timing. Here's a man who has been in office for over 20 years as a House of Representatives member, as a senator, and then Attorney General, who just won his third election as Attorney General. Why now, 2 days before sine die? Jeremy, I think it has to do with the straw that broke the camel's back. I mean, there were so many things said about Paxton, the great weight of it. You would think they could just pick any one, but I think the hubris, or as I've heard referred to, chutzpah, has gotten a new dictionary definition, and it has a picture of Ken Paxton walking into the House of Representatives with a $3.3 million bill that he fabricated as a way to settle a lawsuit so he wouldn't have to tell the truth, and said, here, you pay for it. And so I think that rubbed some people the wrong way. That was back in February, March 2023. A private decision was made to impanel a general investigation committee, which took, a sober amount of time, 2 months, to do the hard work and finally produced their report. And what was interesting is Paxton must have gotten tipped off about it, because that's when he made the outrageous, best defense is a good offense accusation. Phelan was drunk, and then all hell broke loose.
Right. And why do you think that this $3.3 million demand from the state, which, as you say, shows a lot of chutzpah? This was following a lawsuit in which he had fired a number of the top state Justice Department officials because they disagreed with him and because they were upset that he was providing benefits, illegal benefits, to a developer in Austin, as well as who knows what else. Why was that the straw that broke the camel's back? You'd think he had done so many other things. He's already been indicted for other crimes. At some level, you would think this wasn't out of character for him.
Well, I mean, first off, take it from me, that was a full value settlement. And so it was just the hypocrisy that for a year and a half from the date these gentlemen, these conservative, loyal employees were fired, and then had no recourse but to file a whistleblower lawsuit. From day one that lawsuit was filed, Ken Paxton couldn't denigrate it enough. It was a frivolous lawsuit. It had no merit, and he filed what's known as a plea to the jurisdiction. And lawyers know that basically says to the court, don't even look at the substance of this. This is defective on its face, because you can't sue the Office of Attorney General for a whistleblower infraction. Now, that was denied by the trial court in Austin. It was appealed, and his argument was again denied by the appellate court. And then he appealed it to the Texas Supreme Court, where it has sat for over a year. At a time appropriate and convenient to Ken Paxton, he goes to mediation and essentially, in less than a few hours, agrees to a full value settlement. So I think that it was also not just, here, you pay it for my conduct, but it was also the fact that it was a full value settlement. I know $3.3 million compared to the billions in the budget is peanuts, but I think that it finally struck some of the lawyers who perhaps are in the House of Representatives as just a masterpiece of hypocrisy.
And do you see this as evidence that there are a critical mass of Republicans who, in the House at least, who believe in the integrity of the Office of Attorney General? Because in some ways, many of us observing this had lost all hope, right? It's been clear for a long time that Ken Paxton has not been acting as an impartial law leader for the state, that he's not been the highest legal official in the state. He's actually been a partisan and a bully and a demagogue, as Zachary pointed out in his poem. Is this evidence of a change of heart among some Republicans?
Well, it's interesting because I'm looking at the list of the vote tally of who voted aye for the resolution of impeachment and nay. And you're right. There was it 61 Republicans who voted?
I think it was 60 Republicans and 61 Democrats, if I'm not mistaken.
60 Republicans, 60 Republicans out of 86. And, that's obviously more than 2/3, not that you need that margin. But, I think that it goes to show that it's a great argument for separation of powers, in the Texas Constitution. Everybody in the legislature was just happy to let Ken Paxton, be the bully and the boogeyman. Because he certainly is not short on lawsuits to file, and he kind of keeps the attention on him so the legislature can do their thing. But obviously, while we look at this list of people that we associate with certain legislative bills that might be seen as repugnant by many, they came together and stood as a cohesive unit, and it was an overwhelming vote. What was it, Jeremy? 121 to 23, and I think even someone who was absent finally added their name to it. So I think it's really going to wind up being 122. That's an overwhelming majority.
Yeah,
and it's one of the most substantial and meaningful bipartisan acts the Texas House has taken this session.
As I understand it, there's been a longstanding tension in the past 10 years or so between the Texas State House and the Texas State Senate. Could you maybe explain for our listeners in Texas, but also those outside the state, how the system of impeachment works in Texas, and the sort of back and forth between the House and the Senate that led to this moment?
Oh, thank you, Zachary. Yeah, we certainly got a primer on federal impeachment during the Trump administration, and it's similar to federal, but with some important differences. So you start, obviously, the House, can draft resolution, which it did in this case through a committee, a General Investigation Committee, and it came up with 20 counts, and they're very salacious. And it's like a 20-count indictment that a grand jury in a criminal setting would issue. But here's the difference: it's not a criminal hearing or a criminal proceeding. There is no beyond a reasonable doubt standard. This is a purely political product of our Texas Constitution, and that is why the House acts as the grand jury, and then they prefer, is the term of art, their impeachment articles to the Senate, which may have already happened, Zachary, literally as we sit here today. And I know the listeners will be hearing this after sine die. When the Senate receives the articles, there's certain timelines that have to obtain, and roughly 30 days is what I would expect they will start their trial. So if the House presents like a grand jury, they're sort of indicting Mr. Paxton. The Senate is where we will have lawyers and witnesses and documents and evidence. It'll be truly like a trial that we're familiar with. The Senate has to either convict or acquit. And unlike the House, which took the entire 20 count articles of impeachment as one vote, they didn't do 20 separate votes. That's going to be different in the Senate. They're going to do a vote on every single one of these, and he's either going to be acquitted or convicted. To convict, you need 2/3 of the senators present. Now, let me take a breath and see, if we want to keep going, because there's more.
Well, yes, and I would just want to bring out a couple of things, Joe, in your excellent summary here. First, sine die, for those outside the state, that is when the Texas legislature is no longer in session. It meets approximately 6 months out of 2 years. That's the end of session, though, of course, there will probably be a special session, so this gets infinitely complex. But as I understand it, Joe, impeachment and the trial for the impeached Attorney General, that happens out of session. They do not have to be in session for that, correct?
That's correct. And, the session is going to obviously end, we're reporting this on a Monday. It'll end tonight. And then whether there's a special session for Governor Abbott's, role of, or menu of items, that's one thing. The governor needs to issue a proclamation to call the Senate into order to try Warren Kenneth Paxton
Oh, he has to. I did not know that. He has to issue
Yes.
a proclamation for that to happen.
Yes. And if he does not within a certain amount of time, then the lieutenant governor can do it. If the
I see.
lieutenant governor does not do it within a certain amount of time, then the president pro tempore of the Senate can do it. If he or she doesn't do that, then a majority, not 2/3, but a majority of the senators can petition that they do it. I mean, it's got to happen. The Constitution requires the trial.
Now, what's interesting and different from federal impeachment is in the federal case, an impeached president or an impeached federal officer of any other level stays in office until a trial determination. In the case of Texas and in the case of Attorney General Ken Paxton, he is now suspended from office until the outcome of his trial in the Senate. Is that correct?
That is correct. And that's one of the unique differences that I was referring to. And how interesting. I mean, the fact is, the moment he was impeached, 5 p.m. Friday, as I recall, he was immediately suspended from office. And, it wouldn't have been inappropriate for the Department of Public Safety to post guards at his office to make sure that he wasn't trespassing.
And he will be suspended until any determination is made in the trial. So what is to happen if the Senate just sits on this for weeks and months? Is there a time period when they must have the trial?
I have not been able to find, in the event a majority don't petition, then something else happens. I mean, I think this is the third time this has happened, and it came to pass in Paul Ferguson in 1917 and O.P. Carrillo in 1975 that the Senate took it up. I think, let's look at O.P. Carrillo's example. He was impeached in June of 75, and the Texas Senate took up his impeachment trial on September 3rd, 1975. So, there was 60 days or so between the articles being preferred to the Senate and the beginning of the Senate trial. And Jeremy, what's interesting is O.P. Carrillo, as you pointed out, was a district judge. And so there was a simultaneous proceeding ongoing at the time of his impeachment trial in the Senate that was before the Texas State Judicial Qualifications Commission. And at one point, after several days, the senators adjourned for like months so that the judicial hearing could take precedence and be heard, which, was appropriate. And I've read the record on that. When that judicial commission completed its work, it was 30 days of testimony. They incorporated that into the Senate trial, which ended on January 23rd, and itself with about 23 days of proceedings. But it took them from September 3rd to January 23rd to accomplish 23 days on the record.
Right. So we could have quite a while in which Paxton is suspended from office, and at the moment his deputy is serving, but the governor could also appoint an interim. Is that correct?
Well, that's right. He may. And the Constitution is very clear that he may appoint a provisional attorney general. And Abbott has not done that. I mean, it's just, there's apparently an Office of Attorney General protocol that says, when Ken Paxton's out, his first assistant, in this case, Brent Webster, becomes the acting attorney general. And interestingly, Brent Webster was hired on October 1st, 2020, the day the whistleblowers reported Paxton to the FBI.
What do you think this means, this particular impeachment and the ongoing trial process in the Senate means for Texas politics moving forward and for the Office of Attorney General in particular?
Well, Zachary, it is a moment we will never forget, because I predict that Ken Paxton will be remembered for a long time. He's going to be, if history and recent history is any indicator, one of the most obnoxious, defendants, if you will, in an impeachment inquiry. I mean, during the House proceeding, which lasted all of 4 hours, he was texting and calling people, apparently threatening retaliation, in real time, as Representative Charles Guerin pointed out. And I'm sure we're going to hear more about that. So what I'm going to tell you is that this Senate trial is where the fissure in Texas Republican Party will be laid bare. It is a internecine conflict of magnificent proportions, and not to be overly political, I'm trying to be right down the middle here, but it just goes to show what happens when one team is in charge for too long.
I think that's right. And it's striking to me, Joe, I was reading earlier today that I guess the managers or prosecutors in the Senate of Paxton will be 7 Republicans and 5 Democrats. So that means there are going to be 7 Republicans, ostensibly Republicans of very high standing in the party, who are going to be leading the attack on the Republican Attorney General in the Senate. That's quite extraordinary. What could be better evidence of, as you say, an internecine fight within the party? What is this fight really about? What is it that's tearing the Republican Party in Texas apart?
First off, before I answer that, let me preface it by saying you've really got to admire the House General Investigating Committee and how thorough their work was, and how just direct and frank their presentation was at the impeachment hearing. And I expect that to continue.
And Joe, as an aside, both Zachary and I were commenting earlier, Andrew Murr, the Republican chair of the committee and really the person who took the lead on this, who is also the grandson of the great Texas Governor Coke Stevenson, former. The other interesting thing about Andrew Murray, I just have to say, is he has an extraordinary mustache. I mean, he really
he wins the memorable quote of the day during the lead up to the impeachment hearing, where he said, "This information curls my mustache."
Yes,
and I thought that was brilliant. But yeah, look, for all the partisanship and people have taken sides and they will never meet again. I will say, as a traditional Democrat, I was very impressed with Representative Murr, and he made me proud to be a Texan, because I think he handled that magnificently. Now, to answer your question, what does it really mean? Like, why is this fissure happening now? I think as a lawyer, we're trained to find the proximate cause of an incident, an accident, an injury. And the truth is, what you learn in law school is that there are numerous items that can constitute a proximate cause. It's not a sole cause. And so I would tell you that, this is what happens when politics become decadent, and, when gerrymandering reaches its extension and money gets involved, and culture war has finally, I think, reached, an epic moment where it's burst open. And so I think that there's 2 Republican parties in Texas right now. And, anyone in political history knows that happened to the Democrats too. And it was laid bare in the Sharpstown scandal in the early 70s. And, very competent leaders were ejected from office. Who had great political futures, but because of the corruption that involved Frank Sharp and the Sharpstown scandal, political careers were left in tatters. I think the same thing's going to happen here, starting with Ken Paxton. You've got people who have done their duty constitutionally already being called rhinos, and we all know what that means, Republican in name only, but just the crass ignorance that goes into calling someone who's doing their constitutional duty a rhino is everything you need to know what's wrong in the internecine civil war in that Republican Party.
To me, Joe, it looks like a Texas analog for what's happening at the national level. Do you see it that way?
Yes, it's right. It's like got its DNA probably in several states, and there is an outsized effect, the Trump effect, if you will. And I think the Republican Party is having contractions down here as we head toward the 2024 presidential election.
What do you think we can learn then for our national politics and moving into the 2024 election cycle from this moment? What lessons should we take?
Uh, Bipartisanship is alive and well, and it's actually something that should be intentional, not accidental. Uh, and so I think that Texas, for the last 30 years, has been a red state. And by that, I mean all statewide offices have been held by Republicans. You can split hairs as to whether 94 or 98 was the last year, but certainly 94 was the last time any Democrat was elected statewide. By 98, they were all gone, extinct. And that has a consequence. And I think the lesson here is that as Mr. Paxton is exited from the body politic, it would not be such a bad thing to go back to compromise, dialogue, discussion, best practices, and it's done best politics, I think, in a compromise but controversial role. I mean, you can't have a trial without a plaintiff or a defendant, or a prosecutor and a defendant. You can't have a business transaction without two parties. And how can a growing state like Texas, which, using the dates I just gave you, in 94 we had 18 million people. In 2024, we're going to have over 31 million people. How can a growing, significant state like Texas get by with only one party in a political dynamic, in a democracy? So I think that's going to be the lesson, is that it's time to open the door for other ideas.
And as I understand it, the Texas House, which is the body which passed these articles of impeachment on Friday, institutionally has a lot of mechanisms to encourage bipartisanship built in, such as the method of electing the speaker. Is that correct?
Oh, it's true, and that's why I think Dave Phelan, gets a lot of negative press from some people on the far right side of the Republican Party, but he seems very confident in what he's doing, and that's a perfect example that the Speaker of the House is elected from within the membership, which of course involves Democrats and Republicans, because I think you need more than just the number that constitutes either caucus.
Right. And there's also a sharing of committee chairs and various other bipartisan mechanisms in place in the House that you don't have in the Texas Senate and that you don't have in the American Congress, for example. Am I hearing you say, Joe, that your read on Texas politics, and you have as good a read on it as anyone I know, is that we're moving not necessarily in a anti-Republican direction, but that we're moving in a more bipartisan, moderate direction in our politics?
I think so. And, there's good talent in the Republican Party, there's good talent in the Democratic Party, but what must be an essential component, whatever party you're in, is that you respect the Texas Constitution, the American Constitution, because after all, that's your oath of office. So, you take an oath to, honor your spouse when you get married. And, it is frowned upon, when people have extramarital affairs and break that, holy covenant that you make to your loved one. It should be the same in government. All of these people that get elected take an oath of office to preserve and protect the Texas Constitution and the American Constitution. And there are people who follow that oath scrupulously, and there clearly are those who do not. So the movement that I see Texas going, and it's a consequential state due to its size and number of electoral votes, is that we've reached the end road of this somewhat authoritarian dynamic, and it's played out interestingly, and it's going to play out in Ken Paxton's trial.
So Joe, the last question I want to ask you, we always close with a question moving forward, how this history helps us to better anticipate the future and to make better decisions for the sake of our democracy going forward. As you and I have talked about before, there are all kinds of talented people who come into my office. I'm sure they come into your office. I'm sure Zachary meets them also, who care about public service, but for the last 10 to 12 years, they've been discouraged from getting involved because it's ugly, because moderate people get attacked, because you're forced to pick sides, as you said. If this is a moment when we're breaking out of that, what should those individuals who care about the Constitution, who are really about democracy, not about party, how should they get involved? What kinds of offices should they run for? And what should we be thinking about as voters?
Right. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. The spectrum of service is broad, and you should, all of us, look at city council races, school district races, precinct chair opportunities within a particular party, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. Some people, can even serve on a municipal utility district or a water control board. Robert's Rules of Order is a beautiful thing, and reasoned debate and public service is a beautiful thing. It defines the American experience, and more to the point, it can't just be one party that rules the roost, or one party denigrates large cities where perhaps policies are different than they are in the Texas legislature by condemning whole incubators of entrepreneurialism like the city of Houston and Dallas, these wonderful places where people live, work, and have dreams and aspirations. And what I'd say to this one party system that hopefully we're exiting is the famous words of James Brown when he said, "Give the drum a song."
I knew you'd come back to your experience as a drummer. I knew you'd bring it in somehow, Joe.
Well, I mean, there's just so much talent out there, and most people, I think, are they just think it's a foreboding thing to do to get involved in public service, but it's actually one of the highest orders of servant leadership.
And I want to just ask a follow-on. I said that was my last question, but I have to ask this follow-on. If Ken Paxton is removed from office in 2024, there will then therefore be a new election for the Attorney General of the state of Texas at the same time that we'll be electing a president and a junior senator from Texas as well. This was unexpected, but now it looks like that's a real possibility. What do you think are the characteristics that we should be looking for in the framework you've described, which is so compelling? What are the characteristics we should be looking for in someone like a new Attorney General?
Great question. I think it should be someone not from the highly partisan background, maybe someone who has served in local office, someone who is trustworthy in their profession, whether it's law or something else, who has a established career as opposed to being a full-time politician who has been in the system for a long time, because this system is all going to have to stand up and vote. I mean, every member of the House and every member of the Senate is going to be on record as to Mr. Warren Ken Paxton. So, I think that there is an opportunity for the governor to appoint someone fresh, but I don't envy that person, because whoever it is probably going to be the object of ire from the Paxton crowd that may have something to say about their longevity in the Republican primary. So I think the 24 election, as you mentioned, is really where the people of Texas can have their say after this exceptional episode is resolved in the Senate.
Zachary, what do you think? I mean, you're watching this as a young person who I know has been dismayed. I've heard you comment in many contexts about the hypocrisy of so many leaders in our country, in our state, and particularly in the Attorney General's office in Texas, where we had someone who clearly doesn't care about the law, yet he's the highest law enforcement officer in the state. Do you see us moving in the direction Joe is describing, where people will start to look for competence and bipartisanship and seriousness? Or is this just a blip in a longer period of partisan nonsense?
I'm not sure that it's not the latter, but I do think it should be inspiring for young people, because the members of the House here in Texas who voted to impeach Ken Paxton are, on the whole, some of the youngest and most eloquent and engaged young political thinkers in our state. And I think that this shows that a new generation of politicians and people who get involved in politics at a very local level can have a big impact on not just the politics of the state or of their local communities, but on the national news cycle. And I think that it also shows that there is a space for people who might not frame their vision of what a society of laws and our democracy means in partisan terms, but who believe that there is a necessity and a responsibility of every citizen to defend our democracy, our state, and our national constitutions. I think that this shows that there's a space for those people in our politics as well.
I agree. I have to say, I watched a good part of the hearings. I rarely watch the Texas House. It's usually boring and upsetting. But I did watch this, and I think Zachary is spot on. I would guess you'd agree too, Joe. I mean, there were so many young members of the House, and there are people who on most issues I would disagree with, but I had such high regard for the seriousness with which they approached this issue, their courage. Many of them commented on the record about how they had been bullied by Ken Paxton, by Donald Trump, by Ted Cruz. These were people whose jobs were being threatened. They were threatened. People were threatening to primary them, but yet they stood up for the right thing in this one moment. And even though I might disagree with them on their policy positions, it did appear this was a young generation, or at least a set of young people, who care about the Constitution, as you said, Joe, who care about integrity. And I think that is inspiring. Do you agree, Joe?
I agree wholly, and I watched every second of the hearing, and I was in a very happy mood. Not just because of the outcome, but how the outcome was reached. It was something, as I said earlier, that makes you proud to be a Texan. The Texas Constitution was in full regalia that afternoon.
And I thought democratic process was. I was thinking, as all of our listeners know, our inspirations for this podcast are Franklin Roosevelt and Abraham Lincoln. And I really was thinking of Lincoln's better angels of our nature, that Lincoln could look out and see some of the most horrible behavior before and during our Civil War, but still also recognize that there was still a spark of goodness and potential in our democracy. And I think it was there with this as well. And I think it's something we need to build on, which is why we devoted a whole episode to it. Joe Jaworski, you have shared with us learned insights, your experience, your understanding of these issues. And we also know that you're going to be a main player in the future of our state and our nation. And we're really grateful that you joined us today. So thank you, Joe.
Oh, gentlemen, thank you so much. I'm a fan of your show, and I was proud to be a part of it today.
Zachary, thank you for your insightful, humorous, satirical poem. You're on a streak here of satirical poems. And thank you most of all to our loyal listeners for joining us for this week of This Is Democracy.
This podcast is produced by the Liberal Arts ITS Development Studio
and the College of Liberal Arts at the University of Texas at Austin.
The music in this episode was written and recorded by Harris Codini. Stay tuned for a new episode every week. You can find This is Democracy on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Stitcher.
See you next time.